Good afternoon, everyone, all the eminent and respected panelists and the viewers who have joined today for the second of the series of the webinars that we have been bringing on regarding the diagnostics and other details of the ongoing pandemic itself. We welcome all of you on behalf of the organizers. And today's topic would be the diagnostic challenges in COVID-19. What are the points that we need to know, the accuracy, accessibility, and the agility of a particular test, and what should be our preparation strategies for the upcoming next wave. And for today's program, we have a huge ensemble of respected panelists, and I will start with Honorary Brigadier Dr. Arvind Lal Padma Shri, and he is the Executive Chairman of Dr. Lal Paths Limited, and also is the Chair of FICCI Swasth Bharat Task Force. Welcome, sir, and it's an honor to have you, Dr. Arvind Lal. We have Dr. Harsh Mahajan Padma Shri. He is the President of and founder. Welcome, Dr. Harsh Mahajan, sir, who is also Dr. Bonali Datta, the Director of Respiratory and Sleep Medicine of Medanta Medicity, Gurgaon. Hello, madam. We have Dr. Naveen Bhatia, who is a pediatric intensivist and consultant pediatrician in Max Hospital, Gurgaon. We have Dr. Nilesh Shah, who is the President and Chief of Science and Innovation of Metropolis Healthcare. We have Dr. Sanjeev Vashisht, the Managing Director and CEO of Pathkind Diagnostics. We have Professor Dr. Tamal Kanti Ghosh. Hello, sir. He's from my city, Kolkata. He's a Special Secretary, Department of Health and Family Welfare, Government of West Bengal. And we have also Dr. Urvashi Singh, who is a Professor, Department of Microbiology, All India Institute, Delhi. And we have also Dr. Devkishore Gupta, who is the Director of Medical Affairs of KFID, who will also happens to be a co-moderator with me. I think Dr. Devkishore, you can very well start the live panel discussion. And as I've explained already to all the panelists, it's an open forum discussion. Please, all of you, feel free to interject and put your comments on any particular question, which may not be assigned to you also. Dr. Devkishore.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Kaur. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, the most distinguished and illustrious panelists, the moderator, definitely Dr. Kaur, and hundreds of participants from India, neighboring countries, and across the globe. So I welcome you all from CEPHID. Thank you so much for investing your time on a Saturday evening. And I'm Dr. Devkishore, and I'm the Director of Medical Affairs of CEPHID. So today I have an amazing panel, as already shared by Dr. Kaur. We'll be deliberating on prep strategies for future waves. Before we dive into this, this panel discussion, I'll talk briefly on our assay for COVID-19 testing. So I'll share my screen. I hope this is visible to all.
You'll have to make it full screen.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right, sir.
Thank
you. Yeah. Thank you, sir. So I'll just have a very brief introduction on the fast, easy, and accurate SARS-CoV-2 detection with RT-PCR by our assay Expert Express SARS-CoV-2. So this is just a brief product highlights that this assay is having two targets or two viral genes, nucleocapsid gene N2, which is specific for SARS-CoV-2, and the envelope gene, which is conserved across beta coronaviruses. So it has got regulatory approvals from US FDA under emergency use authorization, and also CE IVD mark, and for us, it's ICMR approved. The validated specimen types are nasopharyngeal and nasal swab, and also nasal aspirates and washes. And the runtime is approximately 45 minutes, whereas the early assay termination time can be as little as 30 minutes for positive samples. Well, there is very much reduced risk for technicians and healthcare workers, as the assay is completely integrated and it's having automated sample preparation, and the test is completely self-contained. And the process is simple and fast, set up with room temperature stability, which is an advantage over tests which are having multiple steps and which may also require refrigeration. So this is definitely pandemic ready and having scalable options from point of care testing for clinics up to hospitals with first readouts. Well, so this is the safest solution for the pandemic, which can detect SARS-CoV-2 virus by real-time RT-PCR. It's having onboard internal controls for each sample, which is probe check control PCC and specimen processing control, which is SPC. So this SPC verifies that sample processing is adequate. Additionally, this control detects sample-associated inhibition on real-time PCR assay, which ensures that the PCR reaction conditions, that means temperature and time, are appropriate for the amplification, and that the PCR reagents are functional. And the probe check control, it starts before the PCR reaction begins. So this actually monitors the bead rehydration, reaction tube filling, probe integrity, dye stability. So basically with these controls, you have complete assurance of the entire cycle, entire PCR. And as I already said, that this may take as little as 30 minutes when you are dealing with a positive sample. And this is a completely closed cartridge system and having random access. So the flow is very interesting. So just patient samples need to be transferred, and it takes 30 minutes for a positive sample, and you get the result which is automatic. You don't need any manual intervention, any manual interpretation. So I'll just play a very quick video to simplify.
Cepheid's Expert Express test for easy rapid detection of SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, has just received emergency use authorization from the FDA. In about 45 minutes, healthcare workers will be able to get results whether patients have symptoms or not. It begins with a clinician collecting a patient sample. The patient sample is mixed in a tube. Using the included pipette, this is then transferred into the Cepheid cartridge, which already includes the testing reagents. The lid is snapped closed, and the cartridge is ready to place into the GeneXpert system. The GeneXpert system can be run 24/7 in healthcare settings of all sizes, including near patients. An easy-to-use and scalable solution, the GeneXpert system is available in several configurations. Our largest GeneXpert, the Infinity, incorporates automation to help load up to 80 cartridges that can be run simultaneously. Cepheid's Expert Express test can be used easily by healthcare providers where it is needed most.
Thank you. So this Express SARS-CoV-2 is intended to be performed by trained users in both laboratory and also near patient testing settings. So we have claims for that. So I was mentioning about the scalability. Well, this is how scalable we can become. So it begins with GX4, where you have the capacity of testing 112 per day, having 4 modules. And then we have GX8, which can test up to 224 tests per day. And GX16, 448, Infinity 48, which can test up to 1344 in a day. And finally, the GeneXpert Infinity 80, which can test well above 2200 in a day. So this is actually amazing. And this is having the complete solutions for your daily challenges. One GeneXpert platform, which is high quality answers for anyone, anywhere, and anytime. We'll definitely discuss about each points in our panel discussion, how we can do it anywhere. And it's having a consolidated testing platform with more than 20 disease states. This can definitely help in taking fast decisions, scalable and fully flexible, and standardized definitely, which can be done everywhere. All staff levels can be involved because this is easy to use and requires minimal training. You can get your reports, results any time of the day, and it's a fantastically synchronized system having controlled visibility. So this is the talk of today's time in the pandemic situation, that whether this can detect variants or mutants. Well, we have very good data to support that Export Express SARS-CoV-2 detects nucleocapsid N2 and envelope genes, and the coverage of the mutant strains is currently at 100% for the E target and greater than 98% for the N2 target based on in silico analysis. So this data is coming from US FDA and validated by them. So there's hardly any chance to miss any mutants, as we have discussed in a previous panel, that, well, the N2 is so conserved that this is rarely missed. So you may have gene dropouts, but the chance of missing out variants is virtually nil with OSA. So the challenge for the clinician, yes, definitely the limitation of technologies during night shifts and delayed results, inappropriate patient management. So fast diagnosis results required any time of the day. It delays impact patient management. So we have the solution for that, which is accurate and also available in less than 1 hour, day and night, no compromises. And coming to the challenges for the infection control, well, too many high-risk patients, and we do not have enough isolation beds. So everything is delayed. Isolating patients unnecessarily, who may not require isolation, and definitely it leads to inappropriate therapy, and which adds high cost to the hospital and also to the patients. So clinical teams need to make fast decisions to reduce potential transmission. So there also our test comes very handy. You can choose the right patient, right bed at the right time, and having reduced risk of transmissions and outbreaks. So fast decisions improve patient and bed management, and finally patient safety. So solution for the labs, so you can use the same cartridge and utilize the one platform having any throughput. And this is a vast menu we are offering right now. So I'll stop over here. Thank you so much for your time, and I hand it over to Dr. Kaur for the panel discussion. Thank you.
Quite encouraging for the clinicians like us, right? If we can get the results pretty quickly, and all our decisions making would be much easier. So I would, with the permission of all the panelists, I would like to ask, start the session, and I will ask the first question to Dr. Lal sir, that we know that there is, for all probability and all inevitability, the third or the upcoming wave is coming. So what do you think that, what may be the reason behind it? And do you suggest any changes in our model of preparedness or the testing, even for the tier 1 cities where the diagnostic tests are readily available? Do you think there could be something more can be done? And what's the reason behind that we might not be able to avoid the third wave?
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers, HCP and CEPIT, Dr. Arindam, Dr. Dev Kishore, Rashi, and all the panelists. It's a very high voltage panel which you've got here, and I think we are in for a very nice session. So the first thing which I would like to say from my side is that the third wave is not if it'll happen, it is a question, when will it happen? So different people have got different, kind of ideas about it. But the fact remains that this has taken place, in practically, at least 10 countries. Third wave has been there, USA, UK, many European countries. And even the Bombay model, Bombay people have officially informed, their own task force, which has been constituted, that you please be prepared for the third wave, and which could come as early as, the middle of July. And some people have predicted that it could come, up till the end of November. So the question is not if, but the question is when. So that is one thing. And it is in our hands, as you know. I'm not going to go into the usual rigmarole, how we can avoid it. But the focus should now be on preparedness. And I would like to add here that, it has been said many years ago by philosophers that people who don't want to remember the history or the past are condemned to repeat it. And this was one, philosopher, Santayana. So I think we have learned, but I would like to re-emphasize that since all of us are from a different background, that we are actually facing the pandemic, we cannot, let off our guard. And especially, I'm so happy that Arindam is here. And what I'm talking about.
Yes,
As
sir.
far as the diagnostics people were concerned, they were pretty well up. And out of 2,500, labs, it started with just one lab. I think 60% of them are now private labs, and I think we have done a remarkable job. So I would also
Appreciate
like to, flag here the Delta Plus variant, which all of you, I'm sure, will be talking about. And this is, yeah, this is going to. It has already come. 48 cases have been reported in India, and we hope and pray that we can do something. And why it will not come, and the reasons for the third wave is, number one, that we were again late in vaccinating our population. Only 4.1% population has got 2 doses, and whereas the US has got 46% 2 doses, UK 48%. So nearly half of the population has been done. And in my opinion, once you reach another, say, about 60, 70 crore people, I think that time you could say that you got some kind of a herd immunity. Also, I would like to emphasize here that the unlocking was done rather suddenly, and it was done not in a calibrated manner. We've got to have this COVID appropriate behavior, social distancing, wearing masks, etc. And you would be shocked to hear what I'm going to tell you, that as soon as the unlocking was done, there were 19,000 people that particular evening or afternoon in one mall in Delhi. So this is just not the government, which has to, intervene. I think all of us, we have got to become better citizens. And people were telling me that even in the escalators, going up and down, there was no place to stand. And we have to, again, our formula or our mantra is test, track, isolate, treat, and of course now vaccinate. And the testing needs to be ramped up and to going into the beyond tier 1 and tier 2 cities. And I would also like to emphasize that the importance of rapid antigen tests, which have become now more accurate, I think we should be using them in a much better way. Also, the Prime Minister has, announced the other day, we all were part of this meeting, and when he announced that the 6 crash course programs for COVID warriors were launched by the Prime Minister last week. And in that, you'd be happy to note that there was also one sample collection support, which has also been given a crash course. And I'm happy to announce that we are one of the 111 training centers for such, COVID warriors. And we should also be more aggressive about contact tracing, because there is, I'm telling you from my own experience, a lot of people, both in the government and without, who say that kya karna hai isko trace ko karke, jo aayega dekhi jayegi. In any case, Delhi government actually gave up when they saw too many asymptomatic people becoming positive. And those are precisely the people who have to be caught hold of, because they don't even know that they are transmitting the virus. And from a R0 value of less than 1, which is required, this value for Delta Plus is reached, I believe, 4.5. And also this micro containment measures, and I'm not going to go into detail, but the fact of the matter is that you also must not be caught now with your pants down, and arrange for, I believe now oxygen is going to be in abundant supply, and so will be the concentrators. But you have to think of something else. For example, I believe now in Bombay, they have already announced that 10% in the third wave, people would be, children. So are we ready to have so many children? We have NICUs or neonatal or so small, pediatric ICUs? Do we have small masks? Do we have small tubings? And all those things, which need to be ramped up. So Arindam, I think I would like to stop here. Thank you.
I think it's a very good news that the 6 different crash courses have been announced by the government. From our critical care societies, both from India and Europe, we are also coming up with a course. We didn't get time managing clinically the patients, but now we are ready. We are coming up with a course for the physicians also, right from the best level physicians to everyone, to have a little better understanding of the disease process. I would ask other panelists if they have any comment or or else I will go to Dr. Barnali Datta about that. We all know that we have worked a lot in decentralizing the molecular testing for tuberculosis. So how can you emulate the same for COVID itself? How can we reach to the last mile? What would be your suggestion, ma'am? Ma'am, you kindly unmute yourself.
Yeah. So thanks, Dr. Arindam. So yes, we've done a lot of work in tuberculosis with our mobile vans that we have sent to districts in Haryana to the at the PHC level, sub-center level, and these vans have been equipped with not just digital X-ray but also a gene expert module, a single module called Edge, which lends itself to this kind of going traveling and not getting damaged, the equipment and things like that. And that has worked wonderfully for us. I mean, for tuberculosis. Now, COVID is obviously not tuberculosis, but it is an infectious disease. And I think a lot can be, learned from the lessons, because ultimately you're taking the kind of mountain to Muhammad. Patients don't like to come, especially in the rural areas. It's such a challenge to get people, and distances are huge. People are not aware of illnesses. They would rather pretend they're fine, and it would just go on like that. So if you land up there with a van and you say, look, we are here, anybody with cough, come to us, and that changes it. And and we have had such a good response. And both ways we have, because of having the molecular diagnostic in our van, we've been able to provide them with a point of care diagnosis. There is no patient attrition, which is a huge problem again in India. If you tell the patient, come back tomorrow with your sputum, how many will actually come? God knows. So, these are the kind of problems that we have been able to override by using this point of care diagnostic. Now, in COVID is of course different, and COVID took us by storm. And while we managed to have quite a few systems and processes in place, built it up during the first wave, we got completely overwhelmed in the second wave, shockingly and badly overwhelmed. And of course it's it's a collective fault and collective responsibility of everyone that we just weren't prepared for that. Now, so we have very good diagnostic systems. I think we have excellent point of care, rapid diagnostics, and as Dr. Lal just pointed out, rapid antigen testing, molecular diagnostic, rapid antibody testing. All of these are methods, tools that we can use. And I think if it could be sort of put into place well, then we could certainly go out in the mobile diagnostic and disseminate it everywhere. And of course,
challenges would be the challenges would be too many patients and at one time, right? And acute patients, unlike the tuberculosis, they won't wait, and you have to diagnose and discriminate and put into isolation or treatment. So I think that would be quite a challenging, unlike the tuberculosis, which can be a prolonged or prevalent disease. Yeah,
absolutely. So I think it will only work if we have everything else in place. So having diagnosed, then what? Do you have facilities for isolation, quarantine, care of the patient, making it containment zone, etc.? So I think that all has to fall into place, and then using these diagnostic tools out there would be very, very useful.
Any comment from anyone? Nilesh sir, Lal sir, anyone on this? Okay, so I would go to Dr. Harsh Mahajan sir, that we know we are all aging to come back to work, right? So back to work strategy, because economy has also to go. So do you think there would be a need for on-demand testing at workplaces? Because it's happening in the hospital itself, but in an other than non-medical setup of workplaces, do you think there's a need for on-demand testing? And if so, what would be the preferred technology?
Thank you very much, Dr. Kar, for this question and for having me on the program. It's a very, very important question, because if we have to open up, then we have to open up safely and be able to recognize those who may have asymptomatic disease or those who are mildly symptomatic as quickly as we can, so that we again don't end up into the same kind of problem which overwhelmed us till last month. So it would be necessary to have on-demand testing. In fact, it may be made mandatory in offices. Of course, we should still, in those offices where people can adequately work from home. That should still remain the mandate in the coming months till we know where the pandemic is progressing, whether the third wave is coming, not coming. We should at least not contribute to it coming up early and being a large wave. Where you have to go, like on a shop floor in a factory or in a hospital, or over time we want the schools to open up, the children have, they are suffering emotionally, academically for lack of going to school, interacting with with other children. In these cases, I think it is more or less now established that it would not be RT-PCR that is going to be the go-to test. It would be, as Brigadier Arvind Lal also referred to, it would have to be a point of care test, and rapid antigen test probably is the one which is inexpensive. It doesn't require much of technical expertise. It's not done in a lab. And also it is inexpensive. And because of that, you can actually repeat the test. We do know that rapid antigen test has low sensitivity despite all the improvements. It's somewhere between 30 to 50%. But if a low sensitivity test is done multiple times, say if those who are coming to office are tested twice a week, then your chance of picking up disease early is that much higher. And so I think rapid antigen test would be the way to go. And where it's equivocal or person has symptoms, in any case, he shouldn't be coming to office. But then the gold standard RT-PCR can always come into help. And also we saw the cartridge-based RT-PCR tests, which are again those that are unfortunately to be used in the lab. So there again, between a cartridge-based RT-PCR and a regular RT-PCR, the only advantage is that if you want a few tests to be done, those you can do very rapidly on a cartridge-based test. But I think the future for opening up will belong to the rapid antigen test.
More testing, right? Anyone want to contribute? Anyone? Lal sir.
I would like to add to both the previous question.
Yes, ma'am.
And the current question. So the previous point, Dr. Bonali Datta brought out how they were able to help using their TB system. And I'm sure all of us are aware, and maybe the participants also can be apprised, that the TB program utilized its strength of having so many Cepheid and TrueNat machines across the country and put that to use for diagnosis of COVID-19 in such an effective manner. In fact, I'm a TB person. I've spent last 25 years of my life at AIIMS, 28 years in doing tuberculosis research. And the program initially helped us with a small supply of reagents, and we immediately put our machines to use for COVID diagnosis. So much so that today we are running a 24 hours facility, and we give out the reports within a span of 1.5 to 2 hours turnaround time, using Cepheid and TrueNat both, and trying to do justice to our patients who are reporting to the emergency department. They get a quick report and the triage is quicker. The patients are quickly moved to the COVID areas and given the right treatment. Of course, the taking care of the healthcare workers as well. So this was for the previous question, and to the current question, I would just like to add, if you look at the publications of rapid antigen tests, pardon me if I bring out the science that shows us the sensitivity of rapid antigen tests has not been proven to be great. So there was this publication in IGMR under the ICMR umbrella, which showed 85% sensitivity. Another publication from NIV on similar lines of the SD biosensor test. So the sensitivity was not very great, but the specificity was high, bringing out that once a rat or the rapid antigen test or rapid diagnostic test is positive, a lateral flow test, it is a true rule-in test, but it's not a good rule-out test because of the poor sensitivity. Yes, and during the recent peak and the previous peak, we performed a comparison between CBNAT as well as the rapid antigen test. The sensitivity was not too great. So we may not be able to rely on it as a rule-out test. we must ensure all negatives go for an RT-PCR. And what better than having a cartridge-based nucleic acid amplification test like GeneXpert or TrueNAT, which can actually be taken to the periphery also. So I guess this is a question for later. Maybe we can delve upon this more, how to utilize the CBNAT at the peripheral level. And as far as the sensitivity specificity of CBNAT is concerned, goes hand in hand or at par with the RT-PCR sensitivity. It is almost 100% concordance, at least more than 98% concordance. So much so for now. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that was great to know, and that you have utilized, and it was the need of the hour to channelize the existing infrastructure for the COVID itself in using. And a lot of people actually improvise in that way, and it was pretty good. I will go to Dr. Nilesh Shah, that with the significant capacities, testing capacities now in place, that do you think there is still a need to reduce the burden on PCR testing in the next wave of the pandemic? Nilesh sir.
Good afternoon to all. I think last second wave encouraged all the labs to increase their capacity. They multiplied the capacity in big number. Situation after the building capacity has been that we had a lot of capacity but no work. That most of the labs faced. However, I would say there was unequal distribution. The location where we were over their capacity was high, disproportionately high compared to what was the requirement. But there were locations in India where there was work, but there was nobody to do the test. So that kind of inequality we saw. If you see journey of RT-PCR, a lot of things have happened that has increased our capacity. Our experience of running the test, our efficiency has automatically gone up. We have added more machines and so on. Even the assay has become day by day easier. The incubation period has gone down, and based on that also capacity has increased. The traditional 3-4 hours assay has become 1 hour 15 minutes assay or so, and that also increases the capacity. Now RT-PCR capacity is substantially high. If you see as a country where so many near 3,000 labs are now enrolled, and they are now full. So near 3,000 labs giving RT-PCR report, I think capacity is huge. And I don't think that's a challenge. RT-PCR is going to stay gold standard for all life to come, as of now, what it looks like to be. But what is going to be important now? Two things. One thing, speed is going to be extremely important. And let me tell you further things by first dividing both the population, asymptomatic population and symptomatic population. Let's start with asymptomatic, because larger population who are getting tests done and who wants to get screening done, and that number will keep growing, is asymptomatic one. I think for asymptomatic one, I feel RT-PCR will become like a confirmatory test. It will not be primary screening test, and one should opt for other options like the way Dr. Lal sir said, antigen test. Now, antigen test traditionally most of the good class lab avoided because it was so inaccurate, so many false negativity. Nobody wanted to take a risk of giving a false negative report on the letter. So in fact, I would say I avoided big way. And only need basis selected we did, but the number was very small. But now these antigen assays have come where your sensitivity is as good as 29 CT value. So what you miss is 30 to 35 cycle. Now 30 to 35 CT value as it is, those patients are very low viremia, and people say they not only don't need treatment, they don't even transmit the infection. So probably that is good enough. So antigen test, and specifically CLIA-based antigen test, is a bigger answer, which is much more accurate. Also, innovative thing which are very interesting. Like tomorrow, suppose you have a cricket match and you have to entire audience you have to scan. There are tests like smell tests available on just a card. You don't require any sample collection. Patient just smells the card, and from smelling of the test, and it's a FDA approved test, a smelling of the card, and you can get an answer whether it is positive or negative. Or you have an artificial intelligence based antigen test. LookSpot is one of the answer, a Canadian company which Japan and many of the European countries use. LookSpot is a combination of artificial intelligence with antigen test, where CT value up to 30, it did 32, it detects easily, and then You don't need any data management or anything. It's just an app. It's a 30-second test, only 30-second test. Going ahead, speed is going to be extremely important, and hence all these tools are going to be very vital. Same way, you have a voice test where you just speak and you get the answer, or you have breath test. So these are going to be very, very popular for asymptomatic individuals. Coming to symptomatic, I think here speed is becoming important. I know some of the countries have already put up a rule that your RT-PCR test just 4 hours before, if it is done, then it is valid. Here, CBNet, it becomes very important. You know, or you say Abbott ID or Aquila or Thermo, all these are going to be extremely important. Speed of giving RT-PCR result is going to be very, very vital. I'm also looking at a day where people will opt for symptomatic individual, antigen reflex PCR test, where you screen antigen, and because your antigen test is very accurate, you screen the individual with antigen test, and if negative, just do a pool test I'm repeating, because then only very few people will be left. Pool test for RT-PCR. That may become a popular, because now same VTM tube you can use for both.
Completely agreed.
That will become popular. This is what I see future for testing.
Great input, sir, actually.
Yeah, Dev Kishore, I think we should take some inputs.
Yeah. No, actually, great input, sir.
I have 2 points, please.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
First, the CT value, sir, Dr. Nilesha said, is a good, the antigen test will pick up till 32. What I bring in here is the timing of the sampling becomes very important. So what time of virus shedding are we actually sampling? So if we are sampling early or we are sampling late, the CT value will be less. I mean, the viral load will be less. So these patients will be missed. So as it is, there's been a lot of debate about, RT-PCR not being as sensitive as expected. A lot of, initial publications from BMJ said 70% sensitivity. And there was a lot of debate, initially, even a single paper came out, everybody debated about it as if it was done in their own lab and they would be up in arms against. My point is, CT value is variable depending on several factors: the time of collection, the quality of sample, transport delays, and so on and so forth. So I now bring you to my second point. Sensitivity of each of these rapid tests you brought in. I mean, it was wonderful the way you listed out the new rapid tests available. I would quote the literature on Abbott ID now. Sensitivity of Abbott ID now is at least 10 to the power 2 less than RT-PCR.
Yes,
so we are losing low viral burden. We may be losing the low viral burden. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am, for clarifying. Yeah.
Just one comment from. I'd like to have one comment from Dr. Nilesh Shah. Now, when we started our journey with RT-PCR, we had only 4 or 5 labs in Calcutta, in West Bengal, all West Bengal. But now we have 74 RT-PCR labs. So 50% in the private sector, 50%. Initially, we were bogged up with number of cases, but now we are waiting for the cases. The number of cases coming to the labs has dropped down. So is it the scenario everywhere or only at our place? I don't know what the reasons people are not coming for the test now.
Yeah, it's come down drastically. You're right, sir. It's come down drastically.
It's just the caseload. It will come up if the next week comes. So you pray that it doesn't come up. You can use your RT-PCR facility for something else.
In fact, Dr. Ghosh, to answer your question, I think the numbers have come down of patients coming, symptomatic patients coming. And that's where actually we should not let our guard down. We should continue testing, because it's only through that we will come to know who are positive. And then going beyond that, these positives, especially in a scenario when vaccination is increasing and the virus is trying to find the immune escape mechanism and is mutating. So we need to do a lot of genomic testing also, super added, because these numbers, low numbers, which are real, they should not actually put us in a false sense of complacency, just as we were in January and February and March, and then we had the explosion. So I think the increased testing, if patients are not coming, then governments need to go to patients. in society and see that the testing doesn't flag RT-PCR testing.
Very well
Yeah,
said.
great, great. Yeah, I think Dr. Ghosh
Yeah.
wanted to mean that, now we have ramped up this RT-PCR testing capacity. So whether that should be fully utilized or not. And
I think
coming
Dr.
to
Lal
this-
sir was trying to
Yeah,
say
yeah,
something.
sir, please, yeah.
I would like to reiterate the points made by Dr. Nilesh Shah and Dr. Urvashi, and that is that the rapid antigen test, personally, I don't like it because it cannot be scaled up. But we are not talking about, we are not talking of a comparable RT-PCR test. We are talking about tier 2, tier 3 and rural area test. And that, I have attended seminars where they are promising, and we are evaluating this test with a 33 CT value. And as Nilesh correctly said, with the clear chemiluminescence platform, and even the sensitivity or specificity will go up to about 95% minimum. So that was one thing. And the second thing is that now a lot of emphasis now is being placed by, now this is an epidemiology professor at the Harvard P.H. Chan School of Public Health, who is suggesting that universally weekly testing of asymptomatic individuals using at-home rapid antigen test should be done. Now, we don't have to do it. You give it to them, they will do it themselves. That's the point which they are trying to make. And it should be done weekly, as Harsh was pointing out, bi-weekly, but every week it should be done. And this we can, with the think tank like this, you can actually test it out and you can introduce it to the government that it should be done. And this is for the entire population. It doesn't mean that if you are negative today, you can't become positive tomorrow. Everybody knows it. So that's just to, encourage it. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
And actually, we were asking also that, as Dr. Lal said, that a lot of pediatrics patient would be anticipated. I would go to Dr. Naveen Bhatia, who is a pediatric intensivist and also a pediatrician. Do you think a rapid testing, right, a point of care testing based on RT-PCR would be helpful in testing and screening of symptomatic children and also maybe their mother? Would it be also useful in that situations? And do you think there are practical challenges in obtaining sample from kids? Because we have not done that in a large scale. Just a naive question though.
Yeah. First of all, thank you all for inviting me to this panel. So coming to the question, yes, definitely the point of care testing and RT-PCR testing will definitely help us in screening the patients at the triage level to put them either in the COVID status, and then the treatment moves further. And in case of pediatric population, the parents are usually very apprehensive about the diagnosis. So if the diagnosis is little delayed, maybe a day or so, they are not very happy with it. And our line of treatment also goes otherwise. So if we see a sick patient, sick child who is there requiring admission, and most hospitals have a policy that they don't take. So what problem we had in this time, that most of the ICUs and most of the COVID care beds were filled up with adult patients. So we did not have a place to put pediatric patients also at times. So we had to refer them to higher centers at all. And even if the expected mothers, when they have come for delivery, the test has to be very quick. And most of the time we do a rapid antigen, and by the time we roll in the patients for the procedures, and simultaneously we also get an RT-PCR testing done. So once that RT-PCR testing is confirmed that patient is negative, only then that procedure is getting carried out. So there are all challenges which come to us when at terms of RT-PCR testing. So point of care testing will definitely help us. And the more quicker the test is, the more better for us clinician in decision making also. The second part of your question was that obtaining samples in children. Yes, it is a point which is usually not highlighted. So when we are taking nasopharyngeal swab, many a times the person who is taking also doesn't take it properly. It has to be the posterior pharynx. Sometimes they just introduce into the nasal cavity and sampling is done. Especially when it comes to the kid. The kid is already very apprehensive seeing the hospital environment. They want to be on the safer in the parents' lap. So when you have a kid who is suspected case, you also expect the parents also to be a suspected case. Holding both of them together to get an adequate, proper sample is again a major challenge. So that goes with all the testing which go with nasopharyngeal swab. So most of the time we have to get the patient calm, put them to the bed, explain them the procedure. They get apprehensive, but it takes little time for them to understand. So there are all major challenges which do come in sample collection for the children.
I have something to share on this, Dr. Bhatia.
Yeah.
I have seen nasopharyngeal swab collection in pediatric population, very small kid, is almost not possible. People collect and give wrong report.
That's
and
right.
I have seen pediatricians depending on antibody test in lieu of that, because sample cannot be collected and antibody test is even worse, cannot be used for diagnosing purpose.
Definitely, yeah.
I suggest that we opt for oropharyngeal swab. At least it is better. Comparatively, it's little compromise for sure, but it's better. So I would suggest look at oropharyngeal swab for them.
Yeah, we do that in case if that patient, if the child is too small, and we have to go for that. That is the second best option.
If I may add, Dr. Bhatia, there is a new thing which we are trying. It's known as a rhino swab. And this is a self-administered, it can, the patient is encouraged to...
For a pediatric population, oropharyngeal swab.
No, not oro, rhino swab. It just clips in and it collects a sample itself. We are trying it. And they, according to the manufacturers, this is the next, going to be, the turning thing in collection. So let us see. Rhino swab is the name.
Okay.
Self-collecting.
That would definitely be a help for us. Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, so I would come to Dr. Sanjeev Vashisht, sir, that we are all talking about getting the right thing and also decentralization. What do you think, according to you, itself? Because we have to reach all the last mile. We were talking about it.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for having me on the panel. Thanks, CEPHIT, thanks, HCP. So first thing first, I guess, I think if you look at the country of our size and, population, where the infrastructure is suboptimal, reaching out to the hinterland or reaching out to the tier 2, tier 3 cities is an onerous task. It is not easy. But I think what we have seen over the last 1.5 years, what has transpired is nothing short of a miracle, if you ask me honestly. From a capacity of a few hundred tests a day, today we have reached a capacity of conducting over 2 million tests a day. And this is ramping up. It's still, going northwards. So that's a good sign. And I mean, I remember we had a meeting with the government functionaries being there in early, March of 2020, and where we were told that in the private sector, there are just about 200 RT-PCR machines. Today, perhaps the number has gone beyond 4,000, including the private sector and the public sector both. So in that sense, I guess we have done a commendable job. But having said this, we are facing a lot of problems when we are going to the tier 3, tier 2 towns with the processing. So first is creating the infrastructure. If I talk about infrastructure, I think requires, as you're aware, you have to have a box opening room, preferably with ultraviolet rays. You have to have a, RNA extraction room with BS2 facility at least, and with a negative air pressure, etc., etc. You have to have a RT-PCR room. So it all costs money. It all costs investments. And I think it takes time to really create that kind of infrastructure, at least for carrying out the RT-PCR testing. Second problem to decentralize, which we face, which is a major one, is to deploy the manpower. Now, from where do you really get the trained manpower? In our country, where we have got world's 17% population, 19% disease, and only 1% lab technicians. Forget about the people who are trained in molecular diagnostics. So that's an abysmal picture. I think the idea is to really keep on training people. And I think it's a kind of a blessing in disguise. Obviously, I'm not suggesting that this should continue, COVID should continue, but I guess somewhere I think now people are getting more and more discerning around educating people around training the people and increasing the workforce. Third problem that we face is, of course, putting investments into equipment. I mean, if you talk about the automated extractors and the RT-PCR machines, it's not easy for everybody to invest that kind of monies, especially in the smaller cities. And fourth is, which is a very, very practical problem on the approval side. And this we faced. So today we are running, RT-PCR centers in 10 cities, including the smaller ones, large ones, of course, and the smaller ones where we are. So NABL and ICMR, they have done a commendable job in terms of, giving the approvals and all. They were rather forthcoming and very, very helpful. But where we faced a roadblock was reaching out to each and every CMO in the district where you wanted to put a lab. So everybody over and above the ICMR approval, everybody wants to kind of, assign a special approval or a specific approval, which takes time. Not only that, I thought, this is also applicable, not just to the limited to the lab, but also to the collection centers. So I don't know how far it is relevant, but obviously this is a major, major hurdle. Then the biomedical waste. In the smaller cities, it is fine. It is very, very difficult to find the right kind of agency to collect the biomedical waste. You have to have a ETP yourself. And then even after that, you are actually scampering, and looking here and there to really have the right kind of agency to pick the waste, which becomes again an ordeal. Huge amount of paperwork. Now that's another thing, So one, if you are doing the test in a centralized manner, then obviously you can create a team to do the data entry and all. But in the remote areas, you have to again train the team, make 5-6 people who are only doing the data entry, ICMR portal, IDSP portal, some local authorities, they want various data points. And you have to be nimble enough to give them the, fill the entries in about 24 hours time, which makes it all the more difficult. And, while we have created the capacities, I think this number is going to further go up. Yet, I think it's very important that once government is involving the private sector, it will help if for the tests which are being done for the government through the tendering process, the payments are released immediately. Because people who will be going to the tier 3, tier 4 cities, perhaps with the local, local lab guys, they may or may not have the financial bandwidth to kind of, keep churning out the tests without getting the payments. So I think these are a few things which we need to stitch. But by and large, I would say that I think the way I've seen the things progressing over the last 16 to 18 months, I think it's nothing short of a miracle, as I said.
Sure. Thank you, sir, for such an elaborate answer and absolutely precise. So I'll ask this next question to Professor Tamal Gandhi Ghosh. Sir, you are in the policy-making position. So what are the measures to prevent or mitigate the impact of resurgence? So at the state and district level, what are your views?
So thank you, first of all, to Arindam and Dev Kishore and other panelists for giving me an opportunity. So basically, this COVID-19 is a public health emergency which was declared last year in January by WHO. And then it was again declared as a pandemic in March 2020. Now, by 31st of this year, globally, there are about 128.5 million cases and 2.8 billion deaths. And resurgence, we know actually basically when there is an increase of new cases after a period of lower or more transmission, we call it resurgence. Now, this, when there is no resurgence, it means the testing is optimal. The threshold for early detection of resurgence depends upon if it is less than 10% of cases, then we can say that is a under control. And if the total positivity increases between 10 and 20%, then it gives an alert that there is going to be a resurgence. And if it is more than 20% positive cases, obviously it is a resurgence. Now the question is, in order to reduce the resurgence or mitigate the resurgence, this is not only a public health problem, but it is also a socio-economic problem. So first of all, looking into the public health issues, we have to reduce the number of cases becoming positive. So that can be done as we have already, the government is doing, that is by restricting the travel, putting on travel restrictions, international travel restrictions, and the mapping of high-risk patients, then preparing the infrastructure, developing the infrastructure in the hospitals for treatment and management. And internationally, if you see that travel restriction, and obviously we have, if we make a cooperation, we can have vaccine development and vaccination that needs help of the other countries also. So far as at the district level or at the state level is concerned, restriction, curfews, and we have made certain curfews, closure of the schools, workplaces, this has been done. The most important thing which I feel that during the early phases, the awareness was very less. So awareness generation is a part of government, and also some NGOs help us. If you go in West Bengal, when I usually visit the rural areas, we have seen, or even in the towns also, we can see the people are not using masks. Even the mask is not properly used. The nose is exposed. Only the mouth is being covered. So we have to make certain awareness programs, how to use the mask, and also we have to focus or stress on hand hygiene, very simple things which can be done. Another point is vaccination. One point I'd like to highlight here, that initially when vaccination was started, there were very few takers. We had to wait for people to come for vaccination. Even within the doctor fraternity also, the number of people coming to us were less. But now there is a huge rush coming for the vaccination. So giving vaccination, as Dr. Lal has rightly said, that vaccination is one of the important issues that we can, but we have only 4% people vaccinated. We have to increase the vaccination, and for that the government is trying to provide more and more vaccines to the people, to the states as well as to the people. And so far as the socio-economic impact, there is a large socio-economic impact during this phase, because these people who are daily wages worker, or even some IT sectors, the big private houses, they have lost their jobs. 50% there is cut. So we have to think of this also. Government has to think, as well as the other, being a citizen, we have to think of it. Now, what we have seen here, some of the people have switched off to other professions, that they have started making masks, started making sanitizers, then ventilators. Some of the companies have started ventilators. Some of the industrial oxygen industries, they have started making medical oxygen. So in this way, we can focus on two things: the public health remedies we have to find out, and also the socio-economic impact has to be looked into. So these are the few things which I wanted to share with you.
Great insight, sir. Thank you so much for this. So my next question to Dr. Urvashi Singh, ma'am, you have already shared your views, and we have already come across with different testing platforms. We heard about rapid antigen testing, and you also shared that your inhibitions, your inputs for testing in asymptomatic population where the sensitivity is really low. And we have heard about Abbott ID, where they're having just a single target, which may not be very useful for variant detection. But as you're a subject expert, ma'am, you're having vast experience. So we need to learn from you. I mean, how to choose the right platform for future waves in terms of better variant coverage. If you can explain,
ma'am. The initial light on this was shared by the initial studies in UK, which brought forth that the UK variant had this. Am I audible?
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
I'm sorry.
Yes,
right. So the initial light I was saying was shared when the UK variant, due to the Delta 6970 mutation, had the classical spike gene target failure, what they call it as SGTF failure. In fact, following that particular initial study, there were studies which showed UK variant infected patients with the SGTF, the spike gene target failure. Two studies, one from Imperial College and one from London School of Tropical Medicine Hygiene, showed these group of patients were more prone to mortality. Of course, that was a small groups of patients these studies were reported in, and further work is being done, and we'll soon learn about. So this brought forth the possibility of missing the diagnosis if we are using regions for primers and probes from the not so conserved regions, or those where mutations are reported frequently. So spike protein is one such region. The other regions are N1 and N2 as well. So the tests that we choose ideally should have more than one targets. And also the targets should be such where variations are not reported. Point number 3 would be, since there's a lot of sequencing being done globally, and a lot of reporting to the GISID. So there are several groups of scientists who are actually, trying to see if any novel mutations, because these are single nucleotide polymorphisms, single mutations, which can affect our test really adversely. The classical example was the UK variant SGTF. So, like I said, the tests which have more than one target sites, the target sites should not be prone to mutations. Thirdly, the test designers, the kits that were being used by the Public Health England were actually missing these cases because the test was designed around that particular region. So the test designers should keep on improvising by looking at the genomic data being accumulated. So, the RNA of COVID classically has 29,903 letters, of which, of the 29,000, there have been mutations reported in 12,000. Now, as long as these mutations are not being reported in the areas we are amplifying for the diagnosis, we are safe. So it calls for a frequent and a regular, analysis of all the mutations and using this knowledge to improvise the tests that are available. So I guess I was able to answer the question that the test choice.
Excellent, ma'am. So comprehensive and elaborate. Thank you so much for your answer.
I would also like to bring in one more point here, if you permit. Now, there is this paper which talks about test kits available in China. And this publication was made by the national CDC, the China CDC, which brought out that 6 kits, this particular publication tested 6 kits which were being used for diagnosis in the community. And of these 6 kits, the limit of detection of at least 5 kits was very poor. So these 5 kits were picking 1,000 viral copies per annum. Now, if you're picking 1,000 viral copies and you're missing less than that, so these kits were not good enough. So what the point I'm trying to drive home is our regulatory agency, I am not sure whether in addition to approving a test kit, they're, if at all, looking at the limit of detection. That then brings us back to the question, when we use RT-PCR as the gold standard and use the other tests as, in comparison to the RT-PCR, we need to be sure that the RT-PCR kit used has a good limit of detection and it does not miss the, say less than 1,000 copies. So when China published it, their kits were already in use in the community. I wonder if our regulatory agencies have any idea about the limit of detection of the kits that are being approved for use. So we may be missing a good number of lower viral loads.
So, as a clinician, right, we always are worried about the variants, and also we are facing questions from the patients.
We are worried about, yeah.
Yes, even you are, madam. All of us are actually worried about. So, what would be the straightforward answer? How do we actually sort of guarantee that we are not missing the variants or the ever changing the variants that are coming up?
So let me say the onus of designing the test remains on the innovators, the kit designers, and let me take the onus on the lab people and not on the clinicians. So the kit designers and the kit manufacturers have to keep abreast of whatever mutations are being reported and use the gene targets where lesser mutations are being reported. So, for example, the ORF target is one safe target. The envelope also not so many mutations are not being reported. At least most of the kits are targeting areas where not so many mutations are being reported. N1 and N2 mutations are there, but the gene expert, the Cepheid SARS-CoV-2 does not cover that area. So I would say the onus of not missing the variants shall be on the kit designers or the lab people, who need to be more vigilant that the newer mutations, as and when they are reported, should always be checked back if they are in the target area. I hope that helps.
Thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am. So my next question to Sir Lal. Sir, are you there? So,
hey,
sir, we recently came across with a Lancet publication where some 8 strategies have been described as a future strategy for these future waves. So, sir, if you have to think, if you have to name the top 3 preparatory strategies in terms of diagnostics, so what do you suggest, sir? What are your views?
I think diagnostics, Rhythm, to be slightly candid in this group. I think diagnosis is not the real problem right now. The problem was, you've heard from each one of us that we all ramped up. We ourselves have done about 2.5 million tests, I think, in 17 such places. But point I'm trying to make is that yes, now the diagnostics will shift more towards into the hinterland, inside, because that is where the next explosion or 70% of India, lives in. And these are the same people, who are the marginalized people, who are, the day wage earners, who are migrant workers, etc., etc. So that is where, and I think we've already discussed it, that the strategy there should be a rapid antigen test, which can be done in the field, and those people around him can also be tested. In India, we found that the people, were trying to slip through the net, and this was also with the bureaucrats, the politicians. Everybody was, nobody wants to know the truth. So if you are after the truth, and you can, then devise such, kind of strategies. So I think the testing has to go up many more fold. Not only here, you've heard about, from Dr. Harsh Mahajan, from Dr. Nilesh, Dr. Urvashi, that every week we should now keep on testing. And also we've got to take these things, further into the rural areas where, the next waves are likely to happen, and we may not have all those kind of things available. I would also like to say that the sequencing, which Dr. Harsh also said, that without this, we cannot move. Less than 5%, I think, have been sequenced in India, and ma'am would know better, Dr. Urvashi. But out here, there are lots of people in the civil, in the private practice area, who can also do sequencing. And this is the first thing which is going to, tell you that there is going to be, or there has already been a change. So that I would like to stop here. That's what I feel.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
If I may just, Dev Kishore, if I may just, sir, it's less than 0.5%. In fact, probably it's 0.1%, because we've done about 45,000 or 50,000 sequencing, and our caseload, as you know, is nearly 2.8 crores. So we should have done lakhs and lakhs. So it is very less. WHO, of course, mandates that at least 5% of positives should be sequenced. And in England, they've done nearly 15%. And now looking for the, the Delta and the Delta Plus, they are sequencing nearly 50%. That's how they are coming up with these large numbers that are coming. So that's one area which definitely needs to be increased. And the government is aware. Only recently, they allowed 18 more labs to start genome sequencing. And very soon, they are going to permit the private labs also, which have the capability to start genome sequencing. And we need to ramp it up. That's the only way if we are to somehow, reduce the next wave to a ripple or have it very, very small wave.
Great input, sir.
Can I add briefly? So
Yes,
to
ma'am.
sum up both the experts, I'll just like to make 2 points. One, wider testing is very important. And wider testing, like everybody says, using the rapid antigen test is excellent because it's got wonderful specificity. But please do not forget it's got a poor sensitivity. So retest the negatives by an RT-PCR. So wider testing is important. One, of course, for breaking the chains of transmission, like Dr. Lal sir said. The families should be tested, the contacts should be tested so that the further transmission is stopped. The second point that we must understand is screening by sequencing, what all the experts, Dr. Mahajan, sir, everybody is trying to bring out is we need to catch the new variants and, again, block the chain of transmission, right there and then. And if we know any new variants, like you we were the first group, in fact, to publish the variants of concern, which were leading to, vaccine breakthrough infections. That paper was discussed widely, 2 weeks back. So the importance of doing sequencing comes in when you can actually screen and predict a wave and put a control on it well in advance before it actually takes up a, wave form, and like Dr. Mahajan said, contain it in the ripple form. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am, for your excellent inputs. So my next question to Dr. Barnali. Ma'am, we have seen that testing has been a challenge before. So we have definitely talked about testing, and more testing. But somehow we knew that under testing is happening, but most of the fever and sore throats were indicating towards COVID. But now we are having some isolated cases coming out as flu from different parts of the country. So do you think that, it's even more important to make the awareness on the importance of the testing, and can point of care testing be a game changer? What's your input on this? So especially keeping in mind other diagnoses.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, and typically as it happens in the waves, when the wave comes, it's all COVID, whether you have diarrhea or whether you have, at that point, at the peak, everything is presumed COVID unless proven otherwise. And when the wave settles, like what we are going through right now, there are many other cases which are, they're sort of trickling back in, either they've been under, they've not presented before, and then other cases, as you rightly say, flus. I mean, this winter we hardly saw any influenza, or I mean, I'm sure there's a larger database, but my sort of limited clinical experience, we hardly saw anything other than COVID. But at this point, again, there is non-COVID things are coming. But I think, as has been pointed out multiple times, we have to continue testing. We have to just continue to be very vigilant. And screening, testing, all these are very important things. In this particular thing, point of care diagnosis becomes a very valuable thing. And of course, all our systems, as we rightly heard all the diagnosticians say, that all our systems have really been fine-tuned, and we get results back extremely quickly now. And there's no long wait. What happened at the peak, where people were waiting 3 days, 4 days for just an RT-PCR result. And now with the advent of all the rapid diagnostic tests that we have, given their limitations, I take on board what Dr. Urvashi pointed out about the RAT and the limitations it has. But understanding that, I think we need to go all out for testing, and point of care testing is vital, provided it is backed up with process in place. And I think we have dealt with this, at least in the urban areas. I do know that we have quite good systems in places where the government is informed of every case that comes positive. But again, when it trickles through to the rural, as it is threatening to do now, in the second wave towards the tail end, we saw the rural communities beginning to get affected. And of course, their diagnostics, therapeutics, everything is quite patchy and skeletal. And I think it is important to keep that in mind, to see what facilities can be taken there. Rapid testing, screening, very vital, followed on by the subsequent sort of what is needed vis-a-vis the treatment, the containment, the isolation, etc.
Thank you, Dr. Barnali. My next question to Dr. Mr. Sanjeev Vasishtha. Sir, you have got a huge experience, vast experience of taking tests to the periphery, and I remember taking tests to some difficult countries in remote settings. So, sir, what will be an ideal PCR testing in resource-constrained settings with low-skilled manpower and having lack of infrastructure? So, what's your view on that?
So actually, I think you're asking me to give you a wish list, and we all are very good at giving the wish list. There's a litany of things that we could do on the PCR testing side. So first of all, I think it should be rapid. If you talk about the results coming out rapidly, and the faster you get the results, I think the treatment can be started at a rapid stage, at an early stage. So quick turnaround time is the first and foremost thing as far as I'm concerned. Second is it should be high on accuracy. We have been talking about, so specificity is no brainer. It has to be close to 100%. The sensitivity has to be higher than 95%. So that's something which we aspire that each and every PCR machine should have, or each and every PCR test should offer. The equipment that should be used should have a high throughput. Now that's one of the conditions, especially if you want to do the test at the grassroots, where you want to screen multiple people. So the problem typically that we face with the POCT, especially in the remote areas or where we are working with the government, is that you can't screen because the throughput is not that great. Secondly, the accuracy levels are not also that great, and it comes at a huge price. So next thing is the test has to be inexpensive at the hands of the end consumer. Next is the equipment or the kits which are being used are simple to use. It should be very easy to perform the test, to interpret the results, and minimal training is required. You need not really, it should not be a rocket science where it takes eons to really train the people. So it should be something very, very basic and simple. Preferably, it should be, battery operated. So all the experts, they're saying that, the next wave is going to hit the rural segment or the hinterland probably. So I think it's very important that the equipment which is there should also be able to work on the solar, or renewable energy basically. I think there should not be the requirement of any ultra cold chains to be maintained as far as the storage of kits is concerned or the reagents is concerned. I think 2 degrees to 45 degrees something. Although it's a huge band that I'm suggesting, but preferably I think we should be able to use the equipment in Ladakh and also in, let's say, Rajasthan, in Bikaner or Jaisalmer, right? The shelf life of reagents should be more. I mean, should not be restricted to once you open it and it goes kaput. So we don't want that to happen. Ideally, should be a closed system. So that the contamination is restricted to whatever extent it can be. And lastly, I feel that it should be coming from so that you can vouch for the quality. It should be either CE marked or FDA approved. So it's a huge list actually. I can go on and on as to but primarily I thought these are the 6 points which I thought are important when you're looking at the RT-PCR tests. Or the
excellent, sir. Yeah. Excellent, sir. I think fantastic points, and I'm happy to share that we do have installations in Ladakh. So thank you, sir. Thanks for this wonderful input. My next question to Urvashi ma'am. Ma'am, I'm sure that you are aware of, there is a updated interim guidance from WHO regarding this BSL-2 facilities, whether we can use export or certain other systems without outside BSL-2 facilities if some proper lab risk assessment are in place. So, ma'am, what's your input? I mean, do you see an opportunity to improve access to PCR testing in suburban areas by allowing testing outside BSL-2 facilities for closed POC systems? And definitely when you have requisite precautions in place.
So I think what you've actually touched the nerve here, because when we were talking about rapid antigen tests or RDTs being taken to the periphery, what immediately comes to our mind is how can we take these sensitive tests which have till now been done in specialized laboratories, how can those be taken to the periphery as well? Now, I've always say that COVID has been a very good teacher. It has taught us so much, it has helped us build capacity. We've learned to, like all the experts were saying, so many PCR facilities have been newly made. And I'm sure post-COVID, we'll be able to utilize them for other infectious disease diagnosis, or in fact, cancer diagnostics or non-communicable disease diagnosis as well. So coming back to the question, what I meant to say was, our learning experience has also taught if we are not trying to grow a culture, that is, we are not trying to amplify live copies, and we are, so 2 points really, if we are not amplifying a live organism, and we are not disseminating it while we are doing a test, we can always do it at the periphery. Meaning thereby, if we contain the infectious pathogen, for example, we have this cartridge-based test. So if there is least amount of disturbance, pipetting, aerosol generation, droplet generation, the cartridge-based tests can easily be taken to the periphery, keeping in mind the other issues that we just heard from the expert, Mr. Vasishtha, that we could use sun renewable energy, wind energy. And so basically, we can take a test to the periphery, handle the pathogen carefully. So one option, like I said, is of course, like we have in the case of GeneXpert, minimal handling, loading of the cartridge, and we run the test. I have an additional suggestion. So Satiq can acknowledge this idea if they actually can put it to use. You inactivate the organism. You inactivate the organism at the point you collect it. For example, the rapid antigen test is doing it. Or, in fact, TrueNat also has a simple, GT reagent. So you collect the sample in an inactivating solution. So there is no way that even if it gets spilled or there are droplets or aerosols, that it gets, it infects. It's not a source of infection to the person who's collecting or the person who's performing the test. So these are, I'm a big fan of both these point of care tests. The beauty is their limit of detection is so wonderful. So that's when I brought up the limit of detection of some of the RT-PCR kits, whether they are known, and one of the experts has written, yes, the ICMR is actually writing the limit of detection. That's wonderful. But these point of care tests, both GeneXpert and TrueNat are picking, so GeneXpert is picking 250 SARS-CoV, which is in fact better than a lot of RT-PCR tests. So a cartridge-based test, which is totally closed, nothing escaping out, and an improvisation could be, you collect the sample in an inactivating buffer. That does not really denature the, in fact, it stabilizes the nucleic acid.
Yeah.
You can always amplify it.
That's a good point, actually.
So I hope that,
Great suggestion, ma'am. Thank you so much. Really, I think you summed it up fantastically. My next question to Professor Ghosh. Sir, can you please elaborate? I know that you're a lead assessor in NABL, so if you can elaborate on the local risk assessment of laboratory safety while conducting this SARS-CoV-2 testing, and also as a policymaker, you can share your thoughts if there is some over-dependence on antigen testing, if at all it is there, if you feel so, and which may leave us with quite a few false negatives. So over to you, sir. Professor Ghosh.
The matter has already been discussed by my previous speakers regarding the rapid antigen test. Now, over-dependence, yes, it's a point of care test. So what we have seen is our practical experience that people in the hospital setup, as well as also in the peripheral block primary health centers, district hospitals, they are very happy with this antigen test, rapid antigen, because it is easy to do, and the clinician gets the result very fast. It is also economical, less time consuming. So people are becoming more and more, dependent on this, and we are not getting samples for RT-PCR. But we have made one guideline that yes, you can do rapid antigen test if you are getting negative test. All the negative has to be sent, especially symptomatic, has to be sent for RT-PCR testing, and we have tagged the different centers where they are doing rapid antigen test to our RT-PCR labs. So this is one of the important points that, as Madam has already said, that you can miss the positive test getting negative by rapid antigen test. So that we have already made, and what we are doing, we are also collecting samples from the community, from the area where there is an outbreak or there are some positive cases, for mapping or tracing or tracking of the positive cases. We are doing rapid antigen tests. Again, if somebody turns to be negative, then we are collecting the samples for RT-PCR send and sending it to the RT-PCR lab. And so far as the risk assessment in the lab for the lab safety is concerned, we all know that there are certain things that have to be kept in mind, especially where you are doing certain like COVID-like organisms, viruses you are testing. That is, first of all, this overall infrastructure of the lab should be seen. That is a working practice. What is the standard? If they have got a standard operating procedure, whether it is followed or not, whether they are giving this strict vigilance spills and aerosol generation, especially the sample when they are receiving the sample and they are going for RNA extraction, whether there is BSL-2 or there is goods is there, this has to be seen. And especially another thing is important that sometimes we have seen in labs, in other labs, people are taking this food and everything that has to be actually, we should not allow certain things. And there should be adequate decontamination of the waste and the other materials that have to be identified. Another important thing is that now since vaccination is available, so it should be our priority that all the HR working in the lab, they should be vaccinated. So these are the, apart from that, there are other things which has to be looked at, is the stable power supply, adequate backup of the generators, then firefighting and other things are in place. This has to be looked at. Then also we have to see whether the personnel, the HR working in the lab, they have been provided with adequate PPE or not. Previously, when we started, there was a lot of, some created, some lack of, there was deficiency or some PPEs were not made available to this.
The protection of the lab workers was most important, sir. Their vaccination, their PPE, their well-being, also good ergonomics and others. I think, sir, I would. Yes, sir. Sir, I think we are on the almost on the fag end of the program itself. We have already overshot the time. So I have given the responsibility to ask two very controversial questions, and it is open to all the panelists, but I will start with Nilesh, sir. Sir, we have the price tag for every PCR test, but now that with the capping and all others, and the massive plummeting of the PCR cost price has been enforced almost, right? So be it a competitive or be it a governmental capping. But do you think this plummeting of the price has affected somehow the quality of the kits that are in circulation? It's an open question, sir. Nilesh, sir, you start, and then I would take opinion of all the panelists itself.
I think we have validated many kits which were approved by ICMR, and then before we start using it, we have a validation process. I remember very few kits I had to reject, and more of the reason for rejection was probably the process was tedious and so on. But on quality front, I think I had a less complaint, except few kits which came, which were no extraction kit. I think I was not comfortable with most of them except one, but otherwise had no complaint. Coming to journey, where the new kits kept coming, I think quality improved according to me. Quality consistently improved, process consistently improved, and I have less complaint about it. But going ahead, what I would look forward to is our false negativity getting reduced, so low end sensitivity being improved. I would look forward to more and more variants getting picked up and hence false negativity getting reduced. And the third thing, I would look forward to a test that after the test, you not only get result, plus the positive or negative, but also you get some subtype or genotype easily with one single step.
Yes, that would be, that would be very nice. But sir, how do you know your test had been false negative? How do you detect that? And do you publish your false negativity tests or the results? Yeah, sort of what is the statistics of your false negative test?
Many a times where CT scan has shown clear picture of patient being COVID and the test has been negative.
So the discordance between the symptoms, radiology, and the test results, right? But do the lab do have an access to go to the clinical symptoms of the patient itself? It's a very tricky situation. Maybe
if you're a lab who is communicating regularly with patients, doctors, and clinicians, I think this feedback automatically comes.
Yes, that's it. I will take the views of others, sir, if you may allow. Sanjeev sir, Harsh sir. Yes, sir.
No, I think I quite agree with Nilesh. I guess the quality has improved. I think one thing which has been wanting certainly is improving the sensitivity. We are grappling with that because I think you have to be confident enough to say, look, I firmly believe in my test. If it is negative, it is negative. So that's somewhere it is lacking. The prices obviously are going, southwards. I think that's the way. It's a very natural progression. I think as we evolve, I guess prices are bound to go down. At the same time, I guess the quality has to improve, which is improving. So I think by and large, we don't have any complaints regarding the quality of the kits. And now there are so many kits which are available. I guess I think our life is we are much better poised to handle the pandemic as we were about say 8 months ago.
Spoiled with choices, right? So we would come to that. I think Harsh sir wants to say something.
Yeah, I would say that I agree with Nilesh and Sanjeev that the quality is very good, but you cannot say that all kits have excellent quality. There is difference. You do have kits which are, which have been approved and which we've tried because, of pressure, and they were very, very bad. And they are approved. So please don't think that, A, B, and Z are all the same. They are not. It is just that you learn which are the ones to use and which are the ones which are giving accurate results. And till now, at least, it seems even with the Delta Plus variant, it is these RT-PCR kits which have been able the sequencing done.
We are having some connectivity issues. I would ask this question to Lal sir. And
yes,
also
there are some new mutations.
Yeah.
Sir, I will come to you. I will come to Dr. Lal sir. And one additional question to you, that do you think there should be a rationale for a differential pricing for the different RT-PCR technologies?
And also, I would say that
I think Harsh is having some audio problem.
Yes. So sir, I think you take over, sir.
Yeah, so I've been a great proponent of differential pricing, and the people who matter, Niti Aayog and Ministry of Health, they all know my views on this. And you cannot compare apples and oranges all the time, and especially more so in hospitals. You cannot compare a Dr. Naresh Trehan who's carrying out cardiac surgery, with somebody who's joined a small hospital a year back, a rookie surgeon. So the government in principle does not want to address this because of the ABPMJ. So that's another topic, and I don't want to get into all that, but I would restrict ourselves to the COVID testing. And the COVID testing, there has been actually bombshells thrown at us. And there are many people here, including Nilesh, who's already smiling, and Sanjeev and Harsh, of course. And that the Supreme Court gave an order that all testing by private labs will be done free. So we have actually had, what you call Agni Pariksha, and we have come and we had to convince the Supreme Court. And now, of course, since now all the states and the government says that the, health is a state matter, so the states keep on, trying to arm twist.
Sir, we have a state personnel, sir. You can put that complaint officially.
I agree, but he is not the one who's, telling us to keep on reducing prices. So now we are not saying that don't reduce prices. We ourselves offer to, Dr. Paul and Dr. Guleria that yes, now suppliers have now brought down the prices, and therefore we are able to offer you much less. And that time, I think I was the one who said so, about 2,400 or 2,800 from 4,500. Now, without asking us, if you keep on, decreasing the prices, well, it is not correct, because you don't know what the price. You only know that the reagent, costs this much, but the other servicing part, etc., there's a huge kind of a cost difference. That's point number one. So all what we are asking is that next time when you think of decreasing the prices, call us. And we will, have a discussion on that. And we are not averse to reducing prices. That is my point number one. The point number two is that the government also has to understand that, well, we cannot be incentivized. Now, people like us, if you're having, say, 50 rupee margin or 25 rupee margin, you think that from, don't talk about us, but say a lab who's doing 1,000 tests a day will ramp it up to 2,000 tests? No way. So all these kinds are, the kind of questions are interrelated, and the pricing should be discussed threadbare, which the government of India has not done so far. And CGHS pricing is, I always, raise it in this fora, that, they have just, they are given, they don't even look at them, and they're not given.
And at the best, it could be impractical, if you say so, sir.
Oh, and the government itself on its own has had 7 pay commissions. 7 times the salaries have been raised, but not once, they want to do the right thing, and for which they don't want to sit with the private players, which they should now. I think the time has come. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think Dr. Tamal Ghosh, you want to say
fully
about
agree
it, sir,
with what
very quickly.
We have made capping of prices.
You have to defend it, sir.
DTM and kits, they have all calmed down. What we do, we invite the proposals from the private labs, which are there in our state. Then we discuss with them, then we fix the rate. So presently, we have a capping for RT-PCR, for CBNAT. These we have already fixed after talking with them. I agree with you that they may not be happy.
Sir,
with the rate
in cases of, sir, I will interrupt you, sir. In cases of quality, the lowest bidder may not be the best quality provider.
Sir,
so that part is also the government has to take care of.
We do the validation, we do a tender, all the ICMR approved kits, we do a validation. So we have found some of the kits which are has been validated by ICMR, recommended by ICMR, has not come up to the mark with our validation. So we reject them, we take the best of the lot.
Okay, we will have a food for thought on this, and maybe Dev Kishore, we can have a separate webinar, because this would be quite a controversial. So we will close the session, but I would ask everyone to for a closing comment, and the closing comment should be to our audience, that what would be our learning points for preparedness for the upcoming wave in terms of what we can implement in the diagnostic sector. And these learning points, whether we have taken it from other countries or our other compatriots who have faced it in a much better way. So what would be our learning points for the preparedness in the diagnostic sector for the upcoming wave? Very quickly, I will start with Nilesh sir, and then I will go forward. Yes, Nilesh sir, you have a lovely smile, sir.
Thank you. I would focus on 2 to 3 things. One, ensuring that we reach last mile, and now my last mile definition has changed. It is not cities alone. We'll have to go to tier 3, tier 4. That is where we'll have to service. That is one. Second, speed is going to be important. And third, RT-PCR alone is not going to be sufficient. It will be RT-PCR plus with the tools which I was mentioning, all those things. These are 3 things I would prepare myself for new wave, in case it comes. I pray that.
Definitely, sir. Sanjeev sir.
So I think in addition to what Nilesh just mentioned, I think people at large, masses at large, must know that they can't drop the guard as yet. I think the fight is not yet over. We have to maintain the COVID appropriate behavior. That's our learning. Secondly, I think one thing which I would suggest, and taking a leaf from where Dr. Lal left, I think it's important to understand the relevance of investing back in the, or plowing back the funds back in the industry. We have to grow, we have to ramp up the capacities, we have to create a very good ecosystem where public and private sector can both work hand in hand. So perhaps one of the ideas that comes to my mind is that we should, for the indigent patients, we can make everything free because the money is coming from the taxpayers, which is fine. And for conducting those tests, we should do those in the government sector, or even the government sector, which passes the load onto us. We could do it on a tender price basis, so that could be done. For the others, people who can afford, there should be free pricing. The world has told us the simple law of economics says that demand and supply will settle the prices, on its own. It's a very natural process. I mean, somebody is charging 1,000 rupees and another person is charging say 200 rupees. I mean, this kind of gap would never remain. So let the market forces determine the pricing. And for the indigent patients, as I said, I think government should be well within their right, and I think they can maybe persuade everybody.
So the economy will dictate the rational pricing for the adequate quality product, right? So that's how it would happen. Yes. Very quickly, Tamal sir.
Yeah,
your concluding note.
So far as the testing is concerned, I think we have adequate amount of labs and we are prepared for the testing. But we have to be prepared with our infrastructure that regarding the pediatric cases, pediatric ICUs and all, and we are on the way. So basically testing is, we can do the testing, large number of testing.
Okay, sir. Urvashi ma'am.
I would like to actually delve upon, the salient points. First, talking about the prevention. So, of course, the government is responsible for the vaccine and they're doing their best. And I have all my hopes that all of us will be covered. I mean, of course, the senior citizens have been covered, but the whole community will be covered. And we must have our faith in the vaccine, because even though we reported the breakthrough infections, most of them were mild infections and they did not lead to severe disease or mortality. And that's what not only our observations were, but even in the US, that's what, the vaccine has been able to prevent mortality in a big way, and severe disease was not reported in the vaccine breakthroughs. So vaccination, we must try and cover the whole community. The COVID appropriate behavior, needless to reiterate it, and it is the responsibility of both the government and the individual. It's not that we expect the individuals to do it and the government does not. So, for example, one of my staff was bringing up that there are large crowds outside metro stations. So, if we are offering metros, we must ensure that we are, actually able to reduce crowding rather than enhance crowding. So, rules should be for the sake of, convenience, and also for the sake of going by policy, but not really worsening it. We should implement something which worsens this.
But for a 1.3 billion country, ma'am, I think rules should be adopted by us, not very strictly enforced or implemented. So we have to have our mindset to follow the rules rather than we enforce our rules. And on that,
I said both the
government, and you very aptly said
policy
both the
implementation and individuals. It's a shared responsibility. We cannot really say that the government brought in the epidemic and the government failed to face the epidemic thoroughly. All the governments have had to face this.
Regarding the vaccine, we'll come back because we have a separate session on that, and we will definitely invite you, man.
So coming back to diagnostics. So
yes,
one option is, of course, point of care, where we have discussed at length, the drawbacks of rapid antigen test, but it's an excellent test when we can actually rank a wonderful rule-in test. But I had another suggestion. Why not? So if you're talking of tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 cities, one option is that we take the point of care test to them. And I'm a big proponent of the CBNATs because it has really served us very well. We've done more than 60,000 over 24 hours, over 365 days since we started last year. But in case we cannot do that, why can't we bring the samples to a referral center which reports within a few hours? So that can be another option. So we have
that's the other way around.
Big machines.
Definitely.
We have these big machines that Roche is providing. I'm sure other providers are also there, stationed in a centralized laboratory with high capacity, which can report, say, 5 to 10,000 samples a day. So even that can be done.
But that would be a logistics, say. But I will ask to Dr. Harsh Mahajan for your concluding remarks, madam. Sorry to interrupt because we have already overshoot almost by.
I have already said
it.
Yes, thank you. Screening by sequencing.
Yes, I think, all has been said. To prevent the third wave, I think what we need to do is what we've been taught right from the beginning of the pandemic: testing, COVID-appropriate behavior, and now vaccination. All three have to go hand in hand and have to be kept at a high level so that, we don't see the third wave, or if we see it, it's a very small third wave. Thank you.
And Dr. Bhatia, and then I will last come to Dr. Lalit.
Yeah, so as we have been,
because you would be star of the third wave if it comes. You had to manage a lot of pediatric and neonatal patients. As we hope that it doesn't happen, but if it happens, you would be in the hot seat.
No, actually, I don't think that will happen, because the numbers which we always see are the numbers which are reflected by media. So whenever you have 10 per 1,000 cases, you are not seeing the denominator most of the time. If there are adult population which is 25%, even the pediatric population is only 25%, and most of them are recovering wonderfully without any long-term problem. what is bothering pediatrics at present is the sequence of the COVID.
The
And
MIS
many
and
kids
all
are
others.
coming with the MIS-C. Yes, that
Yes,
is more
yes.
troublesome than COVID infection as such. Most of the kids recover, but only those with comorbidities are actually facing the burden. So as far as I think, there will be not much of pressure on pediatric population, since now another
But aftermath of COVID could be important, that we have seen a lot of
more
it.
important.
But that also, if properly treated and picked up, I think that is also responding pretty well to steroids,
early diagnostic.
IVIG.
And the most challenging part in that is the IVIG, which is a costly medicine. Steroid alone, how much will it help? We are still.
I think the combination had been the best. We'll come back to you on this. We will have a separate on the session on aftermath. So the last conclusion, I think, by nonetheless by Dr. Arvind Lal, sir. So you have the last word, sir.
So thank you very much, Arindam. It's been a very nice discussion. And all I would like to reiterate is that in this trying to bring down this pandemic and all the present and the future wave, Delta plus, etc., I would like to re-emphasize that testing, and then tracking, and treating, which means isolation. And of course, like Harsh said, vaccination. So I would just like to, emphasize that, when the second wave came out, India was not shown in a very nice light all over the world. So at all costs, wherever you are and whatever, job you are doing, you've got to make sure that that kind of a sight is never shown on TV regarding India. Out on, see, all the panelists here, they're doing A1 kind of testing. You represent, or CEPHID is here, which is, you just cannot, say anything against the testing part. So there is something which we are very not up to the mark. And that is, kind of a collective behavior. And I think we have got to adjust to the situation very, very quickly. For example, I think it was Nilesh, or it was somebody said, that what do we do with the extra capacity now? So you've got to be very nimble-footed, that today you are doing 1,000, tomorrow you should be able to upgrade it to 5,000. That's what I'm saying. Similarly, the government should be, the COVID beds, if they were able to create, if they were able to give oxygen, which I am again reiterating, I believe now the oxygen will never be a problem, and the concentrators. But then something else. What about the ambulances? What about the people who are, standing at the cremation grounds? So I think somebody has to look at it holistically, and we have to change our DNA from inside, or RNA for that matter, being this virus. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I will ask Dr. Rashi to give the Thanksgiving and do the valedictory. Yeah, Dr. Rashi.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Arindam. So first of all, thank you. I mean, what a great discussion. And it's very evident from the fact we've run 50 minutes over. So the value that the conversation brought to the audience, to all of us, has been phenomenal. So thank you for that. Dr. Arindam, thank you for excellent moderation. And Dr. Dev Kishore for a great presentation. But besides that, very, very special thanks to all our esteemed panelists. Seriously, what a great subject and what a great discussion. Honorary Brigadier Dr. Arvind Lal, who's also Padma Shri, Dr. Harsh Mahajan, who's also a Padma Shri, Dr. Bonali Datta, Dr. Naveen Bhatia, Dr. Nilesh Shah, Mr. Sanjeev Vashisht, Professor Tamal Kanti, and Dr. Urvashi Singh. Please accept my sincere thanks. I cannot tell you how useful this conversation has been. And it's been an absolute honor to have all of you on the same platform, have this conversation with us today. All of us suffered COVID-19 second wave. Anybody I speak with, at least, I don't think there's a family that didn't get affected by what happened in the second wave. And I truly believe, the only way we can really combat this is, the second wave, hopefully it doesn't come. But if it does come, like Dr. Lal said, it's a matter of when it will come. I believe we can really achieve what we need to and help the nation if all of us healthcare providers, the program managers like Professor Tamal, the industry and the community come together. I want to make sure that we're working closely with all of you to make sure we are giving the best possible to our patients, giving you the support that is required to be able to make the right decisions for the patients. So on that note, thank you also to the HCP Forum for having organized this webinar as part of our educational initiative. I guess that's all the time we have. I could see this conversation go on for another 1 hour, but thank you once again. And thank you for joining us. And I hope you guys have a great weekend.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rashi.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rashi.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.